Shabbat Shalom. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Doesn't quite roll off the tip at the tip of the tongue like Torah. What is that sentence asking? Why do you have to be you? But it says wherefore. Wherefore? Doesn't where mean like location questions? No? You all had good English teachers in your high school Shakespeare classes. It's been a while. Well, maybe you didn't have quite good enough a teacher, right? So let me just back up a little bit. We don't use the word wherefore all that often these days, do we? When was the last time you casually dropped that into conversation or one of your posts on social media? Wherefore art thou, right? We'd only use it as an ironic reference to this particular question, but of course, the problem with that is that many people, maybe not in this room, but many people will hear the phrase, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo, and think that Juliet is trying to locate him. Think that she is trying to find him. Where are you, Romeo? I love you so much. Where are you? But of course, that is not the question, as Daniel pointed out. She's asking, why do you have to be Romeo? Because what's wrong with being Romeo? He's the wrong family. He is the wrong family. If only he didn't have that name, then it would be fine. Then they could be together and love and all of that great stuff. And spoiler alert, it goes downhill from there. And then she goes on to give the famous line, would not a rose by any other name smell as sweet? Right? What's in a name? Who cares about the name? The name is not the thing. It's the thing that's the thing. And if we could but change Romeo's name, then Romeo could be acceptable. He would no longer be from the hated family enemies. Simple, right? Change the word, and then everything would be fine. What is very young teenage Juliet getting wrong in this concept? If Romeo changed his name to Frank, would everything be okay? It wouldn't rhyme. It wouldn't rhyme. It wouldn't sound very Italian. Would that fix their problem? Would they then be able to happily be together? It's still the last name. Okay, fine, he changes his last name. Do you really think the Capulets and Montagues are going to say, oh, the feud is over, he changed his last name. Now he's Frank Smith, and so therefore we've got no problem. No, they're going to say he's still the same guy, he's still from the same family, and we still hate them because of that. The changing of terminology does not actually change the facts on the ground. But I want you to also think of that in the obverse. The facts on the ground don't necessarily reflect a change in terminology. That just because someone calls it so doesn't make it so. If Juliet were to name some other person a Capulet or a Montague, that would not make them part of the family either. You can throw around terms as much as you want, but there does need to be some correlation to what the word is and what the word purports to be describing. A rose by any other name will smell as sweet. A weed will still stink even if you call it a rose. There does need to be some connection. Which is why three very important words have been tossed around recently, and we need to clarify them. Because they are words of immense power, they are words of immense impact, and they are words that are almost always used incorrectly precisely because of their power and impact, and precisely because they don't actually describe the reality at hand. Apartheid, genocide, war crime. What is apartheid? Separateness. Okay, so right now I'm up here and you're over there. That's apartheid? Is it really that low of a bar? If I want to go into room A and you want to go to room B, we now have apartheid? Is it just any level of distinction and discrimination? Discrimination meaning choosing between option A or option B. That is all that is required to be able to categorize something as apartheid? Separate laws applying to people living within the same country. So an immigrant within a country should have exactly the same laws applied to them as a citizen of that country. They should be able to vote. They should be able to get all the same services. A tourist who happens to be in the country for a month should receive the same benefits as whatever the country is doing for anyone else.
Well, that's not what I said.
That's not what you said, no. Which is why I'm pushing that definitions actually matter. There are legal definitions for it, and it's not only discrimination. It is not only that there are differences between people. It's not only that there are different rules applied to different people, for we have that everywhere. And even if we don't want to take citizen versus non-citizen, it's the same rules apply to people that are currently in prison as not in prison. Do we allow the same freedom of movement, freedom of expression, all those? No, of course not. We always have a different level of rules for different people in different situations. That is not apartheid. It is more fundamental than that. It is, because I don't want to get this wrong. I know, you can say you were here on the day when Rabbi Neely unrolled his paper. According to the 2002 Rome Statute, apartheid is defined as an action being committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining the regime. Words matter. Apartheid is specifically as defined by the international law back in 2002 as being, one, racially based, and two, being systematic as a form of oppression, and three, that it is being done in order to maintain the power and dominance of one group over the group that is being discriminated and oppressed. So, obviously the most famous example of apartheid would be South Africa. Classic, right? You had a white government that was systematically oppressing those that were non-white, and they had all sorts of ways of defining that. And the oppression was not just casual oppression and racism of, I don't want to sit next to you on a bus. It was systematically designed to make sure that the whites would maintain power and the non-whites would never be able to achieve that. Pretty clear example, textbook, if you will, of apartheid. And there have been other forms of apartheid that would be quite comparable. Obviously, by this definition, Nazi Germany was practicing apartheid, although the term wasn't used at the time. By this definition, so was the Jim Crow South. And in some moderate ways, so were other parts of the United States for much of our history. Not just, post-Civil War, obviously, pre-Civil War, of course, we would still be able to use the technical definition of apartheid. But let's get to the case at hand, the use of the term apartheid for describing Israel. Is it appropriate according to the definition of the 2002 Rome Statute? No, it is not. Is there a difference between the law of Israel within the internationally recognized, more or less, 1967 borders, and the law that is carried out within the West Bank and Gaza Strip? Yes. Why is there a difference in the law in those two different areas? Is it in order to maintain a racial domination of one group over another and prevent and provide for the systematic oppression? No. It is because it would be illegal for Israel to do otherwise. International law says that Israel does not have sovereignty on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Israel says, we don't have sovereignty on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Israel has never formally extended sovereignty, give or take the few pushes on East Jerusalem's boundaries, to the West Bank or Gaza Strip. That means, according to international law, Israeli law cannot be applied in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This is a fundamental feature of how conflicts are negotiated in the rest of the world, that when one country is in an occupying force, which is even disputed if we're going to use that term, but that's a whole nother conversation beyond today, but even if it were an occupying force, Israel would be bound by international law not to apply their law within the West Bank or Gaza Strip. It's mandatory by international law. You cannot say, we are occupying this country, but not giving it sovereignty and thus not treating its people like citizens, but now they have to follow all of our laws. To do so would be to deny their sovereignty and would be a projection of sovereignty in contravention of international law. So, there are two sets of rules within the West Bank area. Because Israel is obligated to maintain two sets of rules within the West Bank. And Israel, you should know by now, does not apply any rules within Gaza. It applies rules at the edge of Gaza, governing its relationship with a, as obviously seen now, hostile neighbor. But again, it is not apartheid any more than there can be a difference of opinion between Spain and Morocco over what happens on its border. That does not make it apartheid either. Everybody following? Is Israel have an apartheid system within the Green Line, within the 67 borders, not counting the West Bank and Gaza, but in the middle of Tel Aviv and Haifa and any of the normal cities of Israel? No, absolutely not. Are some Israelis racist? Yes. They may be racist against Arabs, they may be racist against Africans, they may be racist against Asians, because there are always jerks everywhere. Does that mean it is a systematic government-approved program? No. And you can see that as evidenced very clearly by the number of people that are of non-Jewish origin that work in every field in Israel, all the way from the most mundane up to and including members of the Knesset and members of Israel's Supreme Court. Not exactly following the textbook example of South Africa. Okay, so apartheid doesn't apply. Why do people use it then? Why do people accuse Israel of apartheid if one quick glance at the 2002 Rome Statute shows that it doesn't apply to Israel? Why have people used this term to describe Israel?
Because people see the misery of the residents of West Bank and Gaza, and they quickly say, they're so miserable, so they get rich, the Israelis must be doing.
Okay, so there is misery within the West Bank, although if we look at statistics, the West Bank and Gaza Strip have a higher standard of living than many other parts of the world that are not being occupied by Israel. So one wonders exactly what the agency is there. But does that mean apartheid is the word that leaps to mind when trying to describe this? There are many other parts of the world where there is a, quote, occupying force, and there is misery, and yet apartheid is not used in many of those other conflicts. Exactly. It is a powerful, emotionally laden word, and it has a subtext that is essential for understanding how many will view this conflict: racism. Right? Apartheid implies racism, which first and foremost implies that we are a race. Notice how that got slipped in very neatly. By having the term apartheid, you can then say Zionism is racism. The Jews are racist because the Jews are erased. Now, do we call ourselves a race on average? Is that a normal term that we use for ourselves? No. Ethnicity, culture, religion, obviously. Race? No. There is no DNA test to prove that you are Jewish. There is no racial type to being Jews. And if you go to Israel, you will see that it is incredibly difficult to know who is Jewish and who is not Jewish merely by looking at them as they walk down the street. As should also be obvious from being within our own sanctuary, that we cannot immediately define who is Jewish or not Jewish by some nebulous racial typology. So, those that wish to demonize Israel, yes, but by reaching for apartheid, they are actually revealing their own feelings of racism towards Jews, imagining that we are a race and that we behave in racial ways the same way that they do. So they say they're telling on themselves. All right, so apartheid doesn't apply and reveals much about the accuser. Genocide. What is genocide? Murder. Okay, so systematic intentional murder of people. So war. Right? When one country goes to war with another person, don't they kind of want to beat up the other side? And doesn't that usually involve a fair degree of violence, which has the tendency to be lethal? Does that mean all war is an act of genocide? Okay, it is specific destruction designed to wipe out a particular category, whether it be a race, nationality, ethnicity, or religion. Genocide is much broader in its definition than apartheid. It is a set of programs designed for that goal. If I go and I attack another country and I beat them up and take their city and loot all their stuff, it is not genocide. It's war, but it is not genocide. And we'll get back to whether I committed any war crimes in just a second, but that is not genocide. Genocide means that when I go and I attack another country, I am not interested in merely looting or in securing their resources or in destroying their regime. I am interested in actually preventing their population from continuing to exist. That is the definition of genocide. Obviously, the Shoah, the Holocaust, is the paradigmatic example of genocide. It is not the only genocide that has been perpetrated. Most notably Rwanda, many other parts of Sudan have also had genocidal periods. The Turkish attack against the Armenians is definitely classified as genocide. There are many other examples in world history where one group has systematically tried to not only murder, but to read the full list of things that could happen, but has also deliberately inflicted on the groups calculated to bring about its physical destruction, such as imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And we can look at the American Indian genocide for examples of those last two, of deliberately taking steps in order to prevent them from having successful families, and even when they do, kidnapping the children away from many tribal nations and putting them into re-education schools to beat the Indian out of them. A classic example of genocide within our own country. Is Israel committing genocide? Why not? At what point does it fail to meet this criteria? So they are defending themselves against the Hamas attack. They are hoping to rescue the hostages that were taken during that attack. And is Israel's goal to exterminate the Palestinian population? No. Is it their goal to defeat their enemies, meaning Hamas and anyone else that is allied with their military goals against Israel? Yes. Like I said, to go and invade another country in order to cause damage to its ability to make war against you is not genocide. And Israel is not creating a condition that prevents the well-being and births and life of the families within that. Is it harsh? Is it difficult? Is it under a state of siege, of blockade? Does Israel interfere with many of the circumstances of their day-to-day living? Yes, that's called war. Are those circumstances designed to exterminate the population, to remove them? No. That would be genocide. People often have difficulty making this distinction. They feel that if anyone is attacking someone they don't think should be attacked, that any casualty that occurs because of that attack must have been intended for the genocidal purpose. Again, notice there is an underlying assumption to the use of the term genocide in so much of our modern, I guess we can call it discourse, screeds online. It is the assumption that the inherent reason that Israel has given for why it needs to attack is illegitimate. Because, therefore, Israel's reason for attacking is illegitimate, any deaths that are incurred in the process of doing so must be for the sake of killing, not for the sake of a legitimate military purpose. Having reached that point, it becomes obvious why I can say their attacks are genocidal. Because there's no other legitimate reason that I can give for why Israel would want to be, I don't know, bombing a building in the middle of Gaza City. If I believe that every reason that Israel might have is an illegitimate reason, then every killing that Israel commits must be purely for the sake of murder, and that would qualify as genocide. If Israel simply flew daily sorties over the Gaza Strip and randomly, indiscriminately dropped bombs throughout the area, yes, then we are getting into a potential issue of genocide. It still might be only a war crime, but it could potentially rise to the level of a systematic attempt to exterminate a population. But Israel is not doing that. Israel is not. And in fact, we can quite clearly see from the population graphs of the Palestinians within the areas that Israel controls, that there has been no decrease in the population. Quite the contrary. The population within both Gaza and the West Bank has continued to grow since 1967, along with their GDP and other features. But the population in particular, if Israel was trying to carry out a genocidal program, the population statistics would prove that this was the most incompetent genocide in the history of humanity. That somehow, in all of our attempts to exterminate the population, we have merely seen it continue to double and double again. It's not genocide. But again, it is a wonderful, powerful, emotionally laden term. And again, it is also usually used by people who wish to invoke it in a way that is inherently anti-Semitic. Why is genocide the perfect tool to use in an accusation of Israel? Because it's the Jews. The Jews who suffered in the Holocaust are now doing to others what was done to them. And it allows a very easy moral equivalency of, well, if you didn't like Hitler, you won't like Israel, because it's doing the same thing. And you know what? It's even worse when the Jews do it, because they ought to know better. Or maybe this was why Hitler was doing it in the first place. And thus you get many comments of, Hitler did nothing wrong, maybe Hitler had the right idea, maybe we shouldn't have stopped what he was doing, now I know why the Germans didn't like the Jews. It spills out from this equivalency that is brought by inappropriately using the term genocide, which, from any basic examination of the situation, would obviously be an illegitimate term to describe the situation. Let's get back to Hamas in just a second. I want to work on these words first about Israel. Then we'll see what happens when we hold it up to the mirror. Okay, so let's use the last one. War crimes. What are war crimes? Don't say crimes committed during the war. Right? Violation of the Geneva Convention. Additionally, inadvertent strikes against the civilian population. And I couldn't quite hear the last part you said?
Well, it wasn't with direct aim.
Without direct aim. So, the most common term that's used for war crimes is the deliberate targeting of a civilian population without military objective proportional to the casualties caused. Now, many people forget that second half, and many people will assume the first half. That is to say, a deliberate targeting of a civilian population. Many will assume that they know when the attack was deliberate. We all remember, I'm sure, the recent kerfuffle over the explosion at a hospital in Gaza. What was the assumption by many voices that rushed to the head of the social media queue? That Israel bombed the hospital on purpose. Right? No one said, gee, Israel was attacking Gaza, and one of their bombs must have gone astray. There must have been an accident. It was immediately deliberate, that this was an intentional strike against a civilian target to intentionally inflict civilian deaths, and therefore war crime. Well, even then, worst case scenario, Israel deliberately bombing a hospital, is that automatically a war crime according to international law? It is only a war crime if it doesn't have a military objective. Now, this, I hope, makes us all very uncomfortable, because most of us cringe at the thought of deliberately targeting a hospital, a school, a place of worship, a residential neighborhood, and we rightly should, because all of us do not want excessive civilian casualties. The death of anyone is considered a tragedy in Jewish law and Jewish philosophy. But, dealing with international law first, there are sometimes reasons why you attack a school, a hospital, another civilian location. If somebody is firing at you from out of a school, are you allowed to return fire on the school? Do you have to check if there are any students in that building first? No, you do not. You are taking fire, you are allowed to retaliate. If you have a military objective of taking a city, and that city is continuing to fire anti-aircraft missiles and the old ACAC guns and all of that, are you allowed to use strategic bombing to destroy the infrastructure of that city, knowing that that strategic bombing is going to also hit hospitals and schools and the old folks' homes and all of those other things that are inside that area? Yes, you are. War is hell, and it's called that for a reason, and we should never forget that. But we should also recognize that if there is a just reason to be at war, then unfortunately there will be civilian casualties. Now, does Israel deliberately target civilians without military objectives? No. This has been shown time and time again that when Israel strikes a school, strikes a hospital, or strikes a place of worship, that there is a military objective, whether it be the military leaders of the group in those places, whether it be stockpiles of weapons, or whether those areas are being used as a launch site for missiles and attacks into Israel. It is a fairly clear-cut case that Israel is not committing a war crime, even if they deliberately target what appears to be a civilian space. But the term war crime, again, delegitimizes all Israeli actions of defense because the people who use it believe that Israel has no legitimate reason to exist, therefore has no legitimate cause for defense. You are defending the indefensible, and therefore every action has no legitimate military purpose because the military purpose is only to prop up the Zionist, racist, genocidal apartheid regime. Therefore, any attack that causes any death is considered a war crime. Notice the underlying assumptions that are used in these different attacks against Israel that are not usually at the top of the social media post. The buzzwords do the heavy lifting. It is apartheid. It is genocide. It is a war crime. And by simply using those labels, Israel becomes the paragon of evil. But by using those labels, the people who use them also reveal what they believe about Israel's existence and right to be in peace under any circumstances. And yet how many use them inadvertently? Parrot them only because they have heard others use them. Assume that others have looked into this deeply and carefully, and that no one would ever have used the term genocide, apartheid, or war crime without being really 100% sure that what Israel has done meets those criteria. But of course we know, no one reads past a headline. No one follows up in an article 3 weeks down the road to see whether or not the article was based on an error. We got lucky with the hospital explosion that there was immediate counter evidence. But what if there had not been? Then the stigma would have stuck. Indeed, in many circles, it still has stuck. Exactly, and which makes me think that many people would want more thorough investigations, would want to track down every possible event that could be considered apartheid or a war crime or genocide. So let's hold up that mirror. What does Hamas want to achieve? Genocide. We know this, it's in their charter. They deliberately wish to kill every Jew that is in Israel. Failing that, they'd like them to all leave. But, truth be told, they want the world to be free of Jews. And they treat Jew as a race. In the West Bank, when discussing what the future Palestinian state would be, Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas have said that it will be Juden-free, that it will have no Jews. We know from history that prior to the establishment of the State of Israel, within both that territory that we now call Israel as well as within the other Middle Eastern states, Jews were a second-class status of citizen. That there was a racist and religious discriminatory process that kept Jews from having equal rights, that kept Jews from having equal freedom. That's apartheid. And those who now call for the wholesale destruction of Jews, that's genocide. What about war crimes? Does Hamas commit war crimes? It's pretty easy to identify, right? Do they deliberately target civilian populations with no military objective? We saw that on October 7th, but we have seen that from their indiscriminate rocket fire, which simply launches into the areas of civilian population unable to be even targeted at a particular military objective. Do they torture? Another war crime. Unfortunately, we have grisly evidence most recently, again from October 7th, of their absolute engagement in torture and brutality to their prisoners. Do they take hostages? We just read a list of the names of the hostages that are still being held. So why are we not seeing the same people who are so implacably acting in the defense that there should be no apartheid in the world, that there should be no war crimes in the world, that there should be no genocide in the world? Why are they not saying, Hamas, shame on you? Because they misuse another word, colonialism. I will push back on that. It is not just that they misuse it, because I can understand from their perspective why it might seem that way. Because again, when they look at a Jew, they think a European. But even if this were true, even if Israel was somehow like the Belgians in the Congo, or the French in Algeria, or the British everywhere else, would that then justify the act of torturing captives, deliberately targeting civilian population for murder, calling for the extermination of all of the people, military or otherwise, taking of hostages? Do those become not war crimes because of colonialism? And the answer is no. International law does not say, oh, in a war of colonial liberation, anything's fair. Go ahead, murder away, burn babies, rape, murder, it's fine, because you're fighting colonialists, and that's okay. For that, we have no war crimes. We don't care about genocide. We don't care about setting up an apartheid system now that you're in charge. That's fine, because you're anti-colonial. No, international law makes no such distinction. And yet, many people use exactly that as their understanding. Because in their mind, Israel is illegitimate as a colonial oppressor in the first place, every subsequent crime that comes out of its existence is blamed upon Israel rather than blamed upon those who perpetrate it, in contradiction of international law down each and every statute. Then there is, of course, the racism of low expectations, of saying, well, we expect more from Israel, but what do you expect from the Arabs, from the Muslims? That's just the way they are. If I were an Arab or Muslim, I would be furious that the world did not hold me to the same standard that they hold Israel to. How dare they say we're not capable of behaving humanely according to international law, even while struggling for what we believe is our independence and freedom? How dare they treat us like that? And yet, much of the international community will do exactly that. They will assume that this is normal for them, but that it is illegitimate for Israel.
I was trying to add that I would assume that the people that wish Israel not to exist would be pleased and supportive of Hamas's efforts.
Well, there are many, but there is also a large lump of people in the world that when they say free Palestine, or when they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they don't mean genocide. They legitimately feel they are on the side of freedom and liberation and what is right. And they don't inquire too deeply into the actual goals and methodology of the people that they have allied themselves with. And this is what makes it especially painful for us here in America, when we can hear people that we know are of good conscience, that want gays to be free, that want blacks to be able to walk down the streets safely without fear of persecution, that want everybody to be able to be treated only by the character of their soul rather than by the color of their skin, the religion they belong to, the orientation they have. And we have allied with them, and then on this, suddenly, it's all okay. Suddenly, as long as the victim is an Israeli Jew, then it's not really the same type of crime. And this is a very big blind spot within much of the population that is advocating. Yes, many of them are absolutely genocidal. Many of them absolutely would kill every Jew they could find anywhere, but many of them would not. People who have been to these rallies have told me that when they talk to some of these people, they say, when I say Palestine should be free, I just mean that they shouldn't be under Israeli occupation. I don't think Israel should go away. I don't think any of the Jews should be hurt. I just think that, Palestinians should be free. When I say from river to sea, I don't mean a genocide of all the people living between the river and the sea that don't agree with Hamas. I mean that everyone should have freedom and peace, Jew and non-Jew alike, between the river and the sea. And they don't understand that the people they march with mean those words very differently. As I began, words matter. Yes, they are sometimes random labels we attach to things, and they could be named something else and the rose would still smell as sweet. But ultimately, Romeo and Juliet are still divided by who they are, not just by the names they wear. Thinking that these words can be thrown around with reckless abandon, changed to suit whether it's my enemy or whether it's my friend, whether I apply it or don't apply it. That's the twitterings of a teenager, as Shakespeare captured so perfectly in Juliet's monologue. But we are meant to be adults, and we are meant to want justice to be done for all. We say again and again in our prayers, God is the God of the whole world, and God judges the world with truth. Truth is sometimes difficult to find. It is difficult to defend, but it is ultimately important that we have to understand what is apartheid, what is genocide, what are war crimes, when do they get committed, when do they not. Even as we continue to regret the necessity of war, we have to keep our eyes clear during it. We have to make sure that we are responsible advocates for Israel and responsible advocates for the truth, wherever it is found. It is not easy. It is much simpler to simply devolve to the other side and hurl insults back and forth. But that hasn't really worked for 75 years to bring peace to anyone, most of all the Israelis. So let us see if we can do a bit better than that. Let us see if we can actually mean the words we say and use that meaning to find a solution. Maybe even get the best word of all, shalom. Shabbat shalom.